In the bright winter silence of northern Idaho, Warren Maddox came home with only one friend left. Bishop, his aging German Shepherd canine, had once taken a bullet meant for him. Now, both of them were retired, wounded in different ways, and trying to live quietly beside a frozen lake. But one faint cry beneath the snowy pines changed the last peaceful walk they would ever take together. A forgotten puppy was trapped in the cold, and Bishop made a choice Warren would never forget. What followed was not just a rescue, but the beginning of a place built from grief, loyalty, and second chances. If this story moves you, tell us where you're watching from, leave your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep writing more heartfelt stories. Winter in northern Idaho did not arrive like an enemy. It came bright. It laid white over the shoulders of the pines, polished the frozen skin of Priest Lake until it caught the morning sun, and filled the air with a cold so clean it made every breath feel newly made. Snow gathered on fence rails and cabin roofs, not in angry heaps, but in careful layers, as if the whole country had been covered by a patient hand. Warren Cole Maddox had chosen that kind of winter because it asked very little from a man. A road to keep clear, wood to split, a stove to feed, a dog to walk. That was the list he gave people when they asked what retirement looked like. He said it with the same plain certainty he had once used to answer orders. Most people accepted it, because Warren looked like a man built for simple things. He stood 6 feet tall, with a broad chest, square shoulders, and the solid frame of someone who had carried weight for so long that even standing empty-handed seemed unnatural. His face was sun-browned and sharply cut, with a strong jaw, a straight nose, and gray-blue eyes that rarely softened before they had measured the room. His hair was clipped in a neat undercut, dark ash at the crown and silver at the temples. He kept his face clean-shaven, not from vanity but from habit. Old discipline still lived in him in small places. The way his boots were lined by the door, the way his truck keys hung on the same hook every night, the way he folded shirts as if inspection might come before dawn. On cold mornings, he wore an olive-drab combat shirt that still fit close across his chest, the camouflage sleeves faded at the elbows, dark horizontal bands stitched around the upper arms. It was not a costume to him. It was simply a shirt that had survived more years than most things he owned. Bishop knew the shirt. The old German Shepherd lay beside the wood stove with his head on his paws, one ear lifted even in sleep. His coat was black and tan, thick through the neck, darker across the back like a shadowed saddle. Age had silvered the fur around his muzzle and above his eyes, giving him the grave expression of a judge who had heard every excuse and believed very few of them. A small crescent of pale tan fur showed on the left side of his chest when he sat upright. Warren had noticed it the first week they were paired, years ago, and had thought it looked like a moon caught under the dog's skin. Bishop's left hind leg did not fold cleanly anymore. On good days, it was only a hitch in his walk. On cold days, it became a reminder. Warren never looked at that leg without seeing a different place. Hot wind, dust, a metal door torn half open, men shouting through radio static, Bishop launching forward before Warren understood the line of fire. The bullet had been meant for him. Bishop took it in the leg and hit the ground without making a sound until the danger had passed. After surgery, after rehab, after papers were filed and commands were changed, Bishop had been retired from active work. Warren had signed his own retirement later. People said it made sense. A handler and his dog going home together. Clean ending. Good story. Warren disliked good stories. They usually left too much blood out. He poured coffee into a dented steel mug and stood by the kitchen window while dawn pushed pale gold across the lake. The cabin sat a few miles outside the nearest town, beyond a road that narrowed between ponderosa pines and old snowbanks. It had belonged to Warren's older brother once, back when the Maddox family still spoke as if everyone would keep coming home forever. Now the house was Warren's, along with the shed behind it, the sagging fence line, and the view of the frozen water. He had not come back because the place made him happy. He had come because it was quiet enough not to argue with him. Bishop lifted his head. "You're early," Warren said. The dog blinked once, unimpressed. Warren checked the stove, then the window latch, then the weather radio, though he had already checked all three 10 minutes earlier. The habits had followed him home. He could remove the uniform, he could put away the sidearm, he could stop sleeping in barracks or temporary housing or rooms with doors he did not trust. But he had not yet learned how to wake without counting exits. Bishop rose carefully. His nails clicked once on the floorboards, then paused while he tested the bad leg. Warren watched without seeming to. "You want to tell me it's too cold?" Bishop stepped toward the door. "Didn't think so." By 7, they were in the truck heading toward town. The road ran between walls of white pine and cedar, the morning light striking ice from the branches in sudden flashes. Warren drove a dark blue pickup with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked only after it had finished complaining. Bishop sat in the passenger seat on a wool blanket folded to support his bad hip. He did not lean out the window or paw at the glass like young dogs. He sat upright, watching the road ahead with the solemn attention of a retired officer who had not been consulted but would still judge the route. At Redding's Fuel and Feed, smoke rose from the diner chimney behind the pumps. The sign above the door buzzed faintly in the cold. Inside, the place smelled of burnt coffee, bacon grease, rubber mats, and motor oil drifting in from the garage bay. Gus Redding stood behind the counter, wiping the same clean spot with a rag that had never improved anything. He was 64, broad through the middle with short silver hair that looked as if he cut it himself, and a face reddened by weather, coffee, and opinions. A faded mechanic's shirt hung under his canvas jacket, the stitched name patch reading Gus in letters nearly worn flat. He looked at Warren, then at Bishop waiting by the door. "That dog has more sense than you," Gus said. "Morning to you, too." "Didn't say it was morning for everybody." Warren poured coffee from the pot near the counter. It was dark enough to float a horseshoe. "You ever cleaned this machine?" "Once. Ruined the flavor." Bishop lowered himself onto the mat near the door with a sigh that made Gus glance over. "Leg giving him trouble?" "Cold morning." "Cold mornings have been happening since before you were born. Doesn't mean you have to pretend not to notice." Warren took a drink of coffee and regretted it immediately. "You always this cheerful?" "Only with paying customers." "I haven't paid yet." "That explains my mood." Gus rang up dog food, coffee, and a small box of nails Warren had not come in to buy. Gus had added them to the counter without asking because he had seen the loose boards on Warren's back steps last week. Warren noticed. He said nothing. Gus noticed that, too. "You fixing that shed?" Gus asked. "Maybe." Maybe is what men say when they want credit for work they haven't started. Warren took the receipt. "You keeping notes on me?" "Don't need notes. You're not complicated." For a moment, the old joke sat between them and almost became something else. Warren looked through the front window at Bishop, who had lifted his head toward the glass. Snowflakes moved lazily through the sunlight outside, bright and slow. The world looked gentle. That always made Warren suspicious. Gus followed his gaze. "You planning to stay through spring?" "That was the idea." "People usually say that when they're leaving before April." Warren tucked the receipt into his pocket. "You ask everybody this many questions?" "Only the ones who look like they're trying to disappear politely." Warren's hand stilled on the bag of dog food. Gus did not push. He was not a gentleman, but he understood when a door had no handle on the outside. He only lifted the coffee pot and poured more into Warren's mug without asking. "Road by the ridge is clear enough," Gus said. "Pretty walk if you're the kind of fool who walks when he owns a truck. Bishop likes it." "Bishop is retired. He should like heated floors and being admired." "He does." "Then he's smarter than you." Outside, Bishop rose before Warren reached the door, as if every conversation had a time limit and this one had exceeded it. Warren loaded the truck, gave Bishop his hand signal, and waited while the old dog climbed in slowly. Once, Bishop would have vaulted into the seat like a thrown shadow. Now he placed his front paws up first, paused, and let Warren support his hindquarters. Warren never made a ceremony of helping him. Bishop never made a ceremony of needing help. That was their agreement. By late morning, Warren had split enough firewood to pretend he had done something useful. The axe rose and fell in clean rhythm behind the cabin. Each strike sent a crack through the cold air. Bishop lay beneath the overhang of the shed, watching him from a patch of sun. The shed bothered Warren. It leaned slightly at the south corner, its roof patched with mismatched tin, its double doors swollen by years of snowmelt. Inside were old tools, broken crates, a rusted canoe paddle, and the dust of a life his brother had left unfinished. Warren kept meaning to clear it. He kept finding other work. Some spaces knew when a man was avoiding them. He stacked the last split log and caught himself listening for a sound that was not there. Not radio chatter, not boots in a passageway, not someone calling his name from behind a door. Just wind moving through pines. Bishop's tags gave a soft metal click as the dog shifted. Warren looked at him. "You hear it too?" Bishop rested his chin back on his paws. "No, of course not." Still, Warren stood a moment longer with one gloved hand on the axe handle, letting the quiet settle around him. He had imagined retirement as emptiness with chores. Emptiness was easy to maintain if a man was disciplined. Sweep the floor, pay the bills, keep the stove lit. Answer questions with fewer words than they deserved. The trouble was Bishop. Bishop made silence alive. At noon, Warren heated soup and ate it standing at the counter. Bishop ate slower than he used to, chewing each bite with steady dignity. Afterward, Warren checked the dog's leg, running his fingers gently along the old scar. Bishop did not flinch. He only looked away, as if medical attention was embarrassing. "Yeah," Warren murmured. "I know." The scar tissue felt tighter in winter. Laurel Vance, the local veterinarian, had given him anti-inflammatory pills and a look that said Warren should stop acting like old pain was a moral failure. He had not liked her much at first. People who were right too quickly often irritated him. He gave Bishop the medication hidden inside a piece of turkey. Bishop accepted the turkey, rejected the deception, and swallowed anyway. "Professional courtesy," Warren said. The dog's amber eyes said nothing kind about his technique. By early afternoon, the clouds thinned and the whole world brightened. Sun struck the lake so sharply Warren had to look away. It was the kind of winter day that made postcards seem dishonest, because the real thing was better. Blue sky, white ground, black trees, and smoke rising from distant cabins in soft, vertical lines. Warren put on his field jacket over the combat shirt, fastened Bishop's old leather collar, and clipped on the leash. He did not use the leash to control Bishop. He used it because the road had ice. Bishop's leg had pride, and both were dangerous. They took the path beyond the cabin, past the stacked wood and the half-buried fence, toward the ridge road Gus had mentioned. Their tracks pressed side by side into fresh powder. Warren's boots deep and square, Bishop's paws uneven but steady. The old dog moved slowly at first, then found his rhythm. Every few steps, Warren shortened his pace without looking like he had. The forest opened and closed around them. There were places where sunlight poured down in clear gold, turning the snow crystals into sparks. There were places where the pines stood close, dark and still, their branches heavy with white. Warren breathed in resin, cold air, and the faint mineral scent of frozen water. He should have felt peace. Instead, peace felt like a room he had entered without permission. His brother had once loved this trail. Warren remembered him walking ahead in summer, laughing at something Warren no longer remembered. Years had taken the sound, but left the shape of it. That was how memory worked when it meant to hurt you. It did not always bring back the whole person. Sometimes it only returned a shoulder turning in sunlight, a boot print in mud, a coffee cup left on a rail. Bishop stopped. Not gradually. Not with the tired pause of an old leg. He stopped the way he used to stop on patrol. Warren felt it through the leash before his eyes understood it. The line went still. Bishop's head lowered a fraction, ears forward, body angled toward the trees beyond the road. His bad leg trembled once under the strain of holding position, but he did not sit. Warren followed his gaze. The forest there looked no different from the rest, snow under branches, a fallen log, shadow in the spaces between trunks. A jay flicked from one pine to another. Wind loosened a small spill of powder from a bough. "What is it?" Warren asked softly. Bishop did not look back. The old dog's nostrils worked. Once. Twice. Then Warren heard something, or thought he did. A thin sound, too small to belong to the woods and too broken to be wind. He held his breath. Nothing. Bishop took one step forward. The limp was gone for that step, not healed, forgotten. Warren's hand tightened around the leash. The old instincts rose in him so quickly it almost angered him. Assess, listen, locate. Do not rush toward what you do not understand. Do not dismiss what your dog hears first. He crouched beside Bishop and touched 2 fingers to the dog's shoulder. Under the thick fur, the muscles were hard. "Easy," Warren said. Bishop's amber eyes stayed fixed on the trees. There was no growl, no baring of teeth, no excitement. That was what made Warren's chest go quiet. Bishop was not looking at prey. He was not looking at a threat. He was listening as if something out there had asked for help and had almost run out of strength before the answer came. Warren unclipped the leash from Bishop's collar and wrapped it once around his own wrist. He did not know why he did that. Maybe because some part of him had already understood that if Bishop chose to go forward, no strip of leather would be enough to stop him. The sound came again. Fainter this time. Bishop stepped off the road into the powder. Warren looked once toward the bright lake behind them, toward the cabin with smoke lifting from its chimney, toward the life he had designed to contain no surprises. Then he followed. One man and one old canine moved into the trees, their tracks running side by side through untouched snow, until the road disappeared behind them. The sound came and vanished before Warren could decide what it was. Bishop kept moving. Not fast. He no longer had fast in him, not the way he once had. But there was purpose in every step as he left the road and entered the trees, his bad hind leg dragging slightly through the powder before catching up. Warren followed close behind, one hand brushing branches aside, the other holding the looped leash, though it no longer served any real purpose. The forest swallowed the bright road quickly. Only a few yards in, the world changed. The open winter light became broken and green-gray beneath the pines. Snow fell from branches in soft little collapses. The air smelled of resin, old needles, and the mineral cold that came up from frozen ground. Warren paused once to listen. There it was again. A thread of sound, not a bird, not a squirrel. Too weak for a fox kit, too small for anything grown. It came from somewhere low, close to the ground, and it carried the thin, torn edge of a living thing that had almost stopped asking. Bishop's ears sharpened forward. "I hear it," Warren said. The old dog did not look back. They moved down a shallow dip where the snow had drifted higher. Warren tested each step before shifting his weight. Beneath the white surface, roots and rocks waited like traps. Bishop crossed with the care of an animal that knew his own limits, but refused to be governed by them. Then he stopped beside a fallen pine. At first, Warren saw only the dark twist of exposed roots, a hollow beneath them packed with needles and wind-blown snow. Then the hollow moved. A small shape trembled under the roots. Warren lowered himself slowly. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. The puppy was wedged between a root and a half-buried branch, not trapped tight enough to crush it, but enough that it could not crawl free. It was perhaps 6 or 7 weeks old, maybe 8 if starvation had stolen size from it. Its coat was dirty gray-brown over a faint black saddle, the colors of a German Shepherd mix, still deciding what they wanted to become. One ear had started to lift, the other folded over softly, rimmed in frost. Snow clung to its muzzle. Its sides moved in tiny, uneven pulls. The puppy tried to cry when Warren reached toward it. No sound came out at first. Bishop stepped closer, nose working. He did not push in. He did not crowd the pup. He only lowered his head until his breath stirred the snow near its face. The puppy's eyes, cloudy with cold and fear, shifted toward him. Warren removed one glove with his teeth and tucked it under his arm. The cold touched his bare fingers like metal. "Easy," he said, though he did not know whether he was speaking to the puppy or to himself. "I'm not going to make this worse." He cleared a little snow from around the hollow. Pine needles had gathered in a mat beneath the roots, and that, more than luck, had probably kept the pup alive. The place was shielded from the worst of the wind. The snow on top had fallen mostly overnight, fresh enough that the puppy had not been buried long. Still, it was too cold, too thin, too quiet. Warren studied the ground around the roots. That was when the scene stopped being only sad. Tracks marked the snow beyond the hollow. Several sets, small, narrow, purposeful. Not wolves, not full-sized dogs either. Coyotes, most likely, pushed down from higher ground by hunger and weather. Warren had seen their tracks before near the county road, light prints spaced in quick lines, drifting in and out of brush. These were close, too close. Bishop saw them too. The old dog lifted his head. The forest answered with silence. But silence had textures. Warren had learned that years ago. Empty silence lay flat. Watched silence had weight. A gray shape slipped between 2 trees uphill and disappeared again. Warren went still. Bishop. The dog's body changed. Not into youth. That would have been a lie. Age did not leave him. Pain did not leave him. But something older than both rose through him. His chest came forward, his head lowered, his tail dropped into a line. The hitch in his damaged leg was still there, yet the rest of him became clean and exact. A working dog remembering the shape of work. Warren moved carefully toward the hollow. He needed to free the pup and get back to the road. No heroics, no chase, no panic. Coyotes did not want a grown man if they could avoid one, and they did not want an old German Shepherd unless hunger had made them stupid. But a weak puppy was different. Weakness changed the math. Another shape crossed farther left, then another. 3 at least, maybe 4. Thin winter bodies, sharp ears, ribs showing when one paused in a slash of sun. They were not villains. Warren knew better than to give hunger a moral name. They were animals trying to live through a hard season. But the puppy under the roots did not have a season left. It had minutes. Warren reached into the hollow. The puppy recoiled as much as its strength allowed, a little shudder of terror and cold. He touched its shoulder with 2 fingers first, letting it feel warmth, then slid his hand beneath its chest. The body was lighter than it should have been. "Got you," he murmured. A low sound came from Bishop, not a bark, a warning. Warren lifted his eyes. One coyote had stepped out from the trees ahead, closer now, head low, yellow eyes fixed not on Warren, but on the bundle in his hand. Another remained half hidden to the right. A third moved in the brush, circling without hurry. "Back," Warren said. Bishop did not obey. The command landed between them and fell away. Warren felt something cold open under his ribs. "Bishop, back." The old dog moved forward instead. Only 3 steps. That was all. But those 3 steps placed his body between Warren and the nearest coyote. His shoulders squared as much as his age allowed. His ears stood high. A deep growl rolled out of him, not loud, not theatrical, but so full of history that Warren's throat tightened. Bishop had made that sound before. At gates, in corridors, beside vehicles searched for explosives, outside rooms where men lied with their hands visible. It was the sound he used when he had already decided where the line was. Warren tucked the puppy inside his jacket against his chest. The small body was stiff with cold. He held it there with his left forearm and reached toward the emergency pouch clipped inside his field jacket. Flare, lighter, small folding knife. He had carried less in retirement than he once had in service, but he had never learned to walk into winter completely unprepared. The nearest coyote edged forward. Bishop lunged. Not far, not the long, stunning strike of his younger years. It was a short, brutal movement, all timing and memory. He cut across the coyote's path and drove it sideways with his shoulder and jaws. The animal yelped, twisted away, and snow sprayed beneath their feet. "Bishop!" Warren's voice cracked through the trees. For one instant, the old dog had bought space. Then the second coyote came in from the right. Bishop turned, slower than he meant to. The animal's teeth caught him high along the ribs. The sound Bishop made was small. That was worse than a howl. Warren felt the world narrow to one bright point. He ripped the flare cap free and struck it hard. Red fire burst in his hand, hissing and spitting against the white air. The coyotes flinched. Warren shoved the flare toward them, roaring now, no words, only sound. With his boot, he kicked at a pile of dry lower branches exposed under the fallen pine. He grabbed one, touched the flare to the brittle needles, and flames licked up faster than he expected. Smoke rose sharp and bitter. The nearest coyote retreated, startled more by flame and movement than fear. Warren swung the burning branch in a wide arc, keeping the puppy pinned beneath his jacket. "Get out!" His voice slammed against the trees. The coyotes backed off, one by one, not defeated, only convinced that this meal had become too costly. They faded into the deeper timber, gray bodies dissolving between trunks until only tracks and disturbed snow proved they had been there. Bishop stood for half a second after they left, then his front legs folded. Warren dropped beside him. No. No, no, no. Bishop was still breathing. His eyes were open, amber and clear, but the fur along his side had darkened fast. The bite was deep. Too deep. Blood spread through the thick coat and dripped onto the snow beneath him. Warren pressed his gloved hand against the wound. Bishop's eyes moved to the front of Warren's jacket. The puppy inside gave a faint, shivering twitch. Even now, Bishop checked the small life first. "Don't you do that," Warren said, his voice suddenly low and furious. "You look at me." Bishop blinked once. The old dog tried to rise. Warren put a hand to his shoulder. "Stay down." For once, Bishop listened. Warren worked fast because work was the only thing standing between him and terror. He tucked the flare upright into the snow where it still burned red, then pulled a clean field dressing from the emergency pouch. It was meant for humans, but pressure was pressure. Blood was blood. He packed the dressing against Bishop's side and wrapped his scarf around the dog's body to hold it in place. Not enough, not nearly enough, but enough to move. The truck was uphill, beyond the trees, beyond the road that now seemed impossibly far. Warren slid one arm under Bishop's chest. The dog was heavy. He had always been heavy, solid with bone and muscle and years. But this weight was different. It was not the weight of a dog jumping into a truck after work. It was the helpless weight of a body that had spent its last strength on someone else. "Help me," Warren whispered. He was not sure who he was asking. Bishop pushed weakly with his front legs. Warren lifted. The puppy squirmed against his chest, a small, trembling heat beneath the jacket. Bishop sagged against his side. Warren half-carried, half-dragged him through the snow, stopping every few steps to breathe, to adjust the pressure against the wound, to keep from slipping. His own tracks from earlier guided him back. A man and a dog had walked into the forest side by side. They came out changed. By the time they reached the truck, Warren's lungs burned and sweat had gone cold under his shirt. He opened the passenger door first out of old habit, then stopped. Bishop had always ridden there, upright, watchful, judging the road. The puppy whimpered under his jacket. Warren looked at Bishop. The old dog's eyes lifted toward the passenger seat. "No," Warren said, though no one had asked him anything. He opened the back door and spread the wool blanket flat. It took everything he had to lift Bishop onto it without jarring the wound. The dog exhaled hard through his nose but did not cry out. Warren tightened the scarf, checked the dressing, then pulled off his field jacket and wrapped it around the puppy before placing the small bundle on the passenger seat. For a second, he stood between the open doors, Bishop in the back, the puppy in front. Past and future divided by the frame of an old truck. Warren shut the doors and got behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the second try. The heater coughed. The flare smoke still clung to his gloves. Snow slid from the windshield as the wipers dragged across the glass. He drove too fast for the road, and not fast enough for what was happening. "Stay with me," he said. Bishop's breathing rasped from the back seat. "You hear me? Stay with me." The puppy made a faint sound from the jacket. Warren kept one hand on the wheel and the other braced against the seat beside him, as if he could hold both lives in place by force. The tires slipped once on a shaded curve. He corrected without thinking. Training lived in the body when the mind had no room. "Bishop," he said again. The dog's tags clicked softly in the back. That tiny sound nearly undid him. He talked the whole way home, not loudly, not with panic, though panic rode under every word. He told Bishop about the stove waiting, about the blanket by the fire, about the time Bishop had stolen half a roast from a base kitchen and made 3 grown men lie to protect him, about anything that was not blood on the floor mat and a puppy too weak to lift its head. The cabin appeared through the pines like something from another life. Warren pulled up too close to the porch, left the truck crooked, and carried the puppy inside first, because cold could kill fast, and because Bishop's eyes followed the bundle until Warren could not ignore what the old dog wanted. 2 minutes, he told Bishop. "I'm coming back." Inside the cabin, he set the puppy in a laundry basket lined with towels, then placed the basket near the stove, but not against it. Too much heat too quickly could hurt more than help. He remembered that from winter survival training, and from a veterinarian's pamphlet he had once pretended not to read. He rubbed the puppy gently through the towel, small circles over the ribs, feeling for breath. There. Weak. Present. He turned the stove damper, added kindling, and pulled the space heater from the mudroom shelf. Then he ran back out. Bishop had tried to lift his head. That broke something in Warren, cleanly and without noise. He carried the old dog with both arms, feeling the warm spread of blood against his sleeve. Bishop was heavier than the puppy, heavier than wood, heavier than any pack Warren had carried, because this weight had a name and years, and the shape of every morning he had survived since retirement. In the shed, Warren had more room to work. He kicked aside a crate, dragged down 2 old army blankets, and laid Bishop near the heater. Not too close. Never too close. He checked the dressing. The blood had slowed, but not stopped. The puppy's basket came next. Warren placed it where Bishop could see. The old dog's eyes found the small bundle immediately. The puppy stirred under the towel, one folded ear showing, muzzle barely visible. It made a tiny, broken sound. Bishop's tail moved once, only once. Not a wag, a decision. Warren knelt between them, his hands red, his breath coming hard. "Don't look at him," he said, though his voice had lost its force. "Look at me." Bishop did not. He kept his gaze on the puppy, steady and tired, and full of something Warren did not want to understand yet. The shed hummed with the heater's effort. Outside, the winter day remained bright and beautiful, careless in the way weather could be. Snow glittered on the roof. The lake shone beyond the trees. Nothing in the world had changed, except everything. Bishop shifted his head a fraction toward the basket. Warren followed the movement. The puppy was alive because Bishop had decided it would be. That truth entered the room quietly, but once it was there, Warren could not push it out. He pressed one hand to Bishop's shoulder and the other to the edge of the basket. "All right," he whispered. The old dog's eyes closed halfway. Warren swallowed hard. "I'll keep it alive." Warren's hands knew what to do before his mind agreed to be present. Pressure on the wound, heat for the small body, distance from direct flame. Check breathing. Keep the room calm. Do not let panic become another injury. The shed behind the cabin had never been meant for this. It had been built for tools, lumber, rusted hinges, and all the things men promised to repair when spring came. Now the old space held a dying canine, a half-frozen puppy, and Warren Cole Maddox kneeling between them with blood on his sleeves and snow melting from his boots. The heater hummed with a tired, uneven sound. Outside, daylight still shone clean and bright over the lake, insultingly beautiful. Inside, the air smelled of wet fur, iron, old wood, and the faint chemical bite of the field dressing pressed against Bishop's ribs. Warren pulled his phone from his pocket with fingers that did not feel like his own. He knew the number because he had written it on a card and stuck it above the kitchen sink after Bishop's last checkup. At the time, it had seemed like a practical thing, responsible, ordinary. Now the card felt like a prayer he had prepared without knowing it. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered on the 5th. "Vance Veterinary? This is Warren Maddox. I need Dr. Vance." A pause. Paper shifted. "This is Laurel." Her voice was steady, lower than he remembered, with a rough edge of someone who had been working since before breakfast. Not soft, not cold, useful. "Bishop's been bitten," Warren said. "Deep wound. Right side, high along the ribs. Heavy bleeding. I have pressure on it." "How long ago?" "Maybe 20 minutes." "By what?" "Coyotes." The silence that followed was not hesitation. It was calculation. "Is he conscious?" "Yes." "Gums?" Warren looked at Bishop. The old dog's eyes were half open, fixed on the laundry basket where the puppy lay beneath towels. Warren lifted Bishop's lip with a gentleness that made his own throat hurt. "Pale," Breathing? Fast, shallow. Warren, listen carefully. Keep pressure on the wound. Do not remove the dressing to check it unless it soaks through completely. If it does, add more over the top. Keep him warm, but not hot. No food, no water right now. His jaw tightened. Can you get here? I'm leaving now. The road's bad. I have four-wheel drive and a poor relationship with caution. That would have almost been funny in another life. There's a puppy, Warren said. A puppy? 6, maybe 8 weeks. Hypothermic, weak. I found it under roots. Is it conscious? Barely. Do not put it directly against the stove. Warm it gradually. Towels from the dryer if you have power. If you have corn syrup or honey, rub a tiny amount on the gums only if it can swallow. Don't force water. Check the gums. Pink is good, white or gray is bad. If it starts gasping or goes limp, call me back while I'm driving. Warren closed his eyes for 1 second. 2 patients, 1 set of hands, one of them Bishop. Understood, he said. Laurel's voice changed then, not softer exactly, but closer. Warren, keep talking to him. He looked down at Bishop. The old dog's ears moved faintly at the sound of his name, though his eyes stayed on the basket. I am. Good. I'm on my way. The call ended. For a moment, Warren stayed still with the phone in his hand. In the service, help had always had coordinates, vehicles, call signs, estimated arrival. Here, help was a veterinarian in a pickup somewhere beyond snowy roads and bad curves. He set the phone down and moved. The cabin had warm towels. The dryer was still running from that morning, full of laundry he had forgotten to fold. He grabbed them, returned to the shed, and tucked one around the puppy's basket, leaving space for air. The small body inside trembled once beneath the cloth. Not too fast, Warren said, repeating Laurel's instruction, as if obedience could build a bridge over fear. He found honey in the kitchen cabinet, crystallized near the bottom, and warmed the jar under water until he could smear the smallest trace onto his finger. The puppy's gums were pale, but its tongue flickered weakly when he touched them. That's it, Warren whispered. You're still in this. Bishop exhaled. Warren turned so quickly his knee struck the floor. I'm here. He pressed one hand to Bishop's shoulder, the other checking the scarf holding the dressing. Blood had seeped through the outer layer, but had not flooded. Not yet. The word did not comfort him. The old dog's breathing came in hard pulls. Every few breaths, Bishop's body tightened as pain moved through him. He did not cry. Warren wished he would. A cry would have given Warren something to answer. You remember Norfolk? Warren said, because Laurel had told him to keep talking and because silence had grown teeth. That idiot lieutenant who said you looked too friendly for perimeter work? Bishop's eyes moved slightly. You stared at him for 7 straight minutes until he asked to change seats. The heater hummed. You were right about him. Bishop blinked once. Warren swallowed. You were right about most people. Snow slid from the shed roof with a soft rush. He kept talking. Not about blood, not about age, not about what he already understood but would not let into language. He talked about old bases, bad coffee, Bishop stealing roast beef off a counter and then sitting with such perfect dignity that 3 men blamed each other before anyone blamed the dog. He talked about the day Bishop learned to open a latch and refused to admit it. He talked until the words thinned and became only sound. Headlights swept across the shed wall 40 minutes later. Laurel Vance did not knock like a guest. She came through the door carrying a dark medical bag and wearing a navy winter coat dusted with snow, her boots already wet at the cuffs. Her hair, brown with copper gold threads, was tied low at the back of her neck, but the wind had pulled loose strands across her face. She looked tired in a way Warren recognized. Not sleepy, not weak, but worn from showing up where pain waited. Her eyes went first to Bishop, then to the basket, then to Warren's hands. "You did well keeping pressure," she said. He did not answer. She took that as permission to work. Laurel knelt beside Bishop, moving with the practiced economy of someone who knew that frightened animals watched wasted motion. She let Bishop smell the back of her gloved hand. The old dog's nostrils moved once. "Hello, Bishop," she said. "I wish we were doing this under better circumstances." Bishop's eyes remained clear. That seemed to cost Laurel something. She checked his gums, listened to his chest, palpated around the dressing without removing it at first. Her face did not change much. That was how Warren knew it was bad. People who had good news often rushed to give it shape. People with bad news made room before placing it down. "Tell me straight," Warren said. Laurel looked at him. Her eyes were light brown, steady, with no appetite for drama. "The wound is deep. He's lost a lot of blood. I'm concerned about internal damage and shock. His age and the old leg injury reduce his reserve. Can you stabilize him for transport?" "I can try to support him, but the nearest surgical setup that might handle this is too far in these road conditions." "That's not what I asked." "I know." The shed seemed to shrink around them. Warren's hand tightened on Bishop's fur. Laurel continued, quieter. "If this had happened 10 minutes from a surgical clinic, with clear roads and a younger dog, we'd be having a different conversation." "That isn't where we are." Warren stared at the floorboards. There was blood in the grooves of the wood. "Do what you can." "I will." She did. There was no grand speech in it, no miracle in the first 5 minutes. Laurel started an injection for pain and shock support, checked the wound more closely, and packed additional dressing over Warren's field bandage. She worked with controlled urgency, giving Bishop disposition where she could, relief where she could, truth where she had no other medicine. Then she turned to the basket. The puppy had begun to shiver harder, which Laurel said was better than not shivering at all. She lifted it with both hands, wrapped in towel, and examined it beneath the work light Warren had clamped to a beam. The little body looked even smaller in her hands. Dirty gray-brown fur, one ear folded, ribs too easy to feel. "Male," she said. "Dehydrated, hypothermic, malnourished. But he has a swallow reflex." "Will he live?" Laurel did not look up. "If he makes it through the night, his chances improve." Warren hated the word "if." Laurel placed the puppy back in the basket and adjusted the towels. He didn't freeze because those roots shielded him. Whoever left him, or however he got there, he wasn't exposed long enough for the cold to finish it. Warren heard the edge in her voice. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more disciplined. "Coyotes found him. And Bishop found him first." Bishop's ears moved faintly. Laurel noticed. For the next hour, the shed became a place of small tasks and terrible waiting. Warm towel, check gums, check breathing. Add wood to the stove inside the cabin. Keep the heater steady. Monitor Bishop. Monitor the puppy. Laurel gave instructions without wasting words, and Warren obeyed without resentment. He had never confused taking orders with weakness, when the person giving them knew the work. At one point, Laurel reached for a roll of gauze, and the sleeve of her coat slid back enough for Warren to see a scar across her wrist, pale and old. Not surgical, not neat. She noticed his glance. "Rescue after a wildfire," she said, tying the gauze. "A horse decided my arm was the door." "You kept the arm." "I'm stubborn." "That helps?" "Sometimes. Sometimes it just makes the paperwork longer." It was not humor, exactly, but it opened a crack in the room where breath could pass. Bishop shifted. Warren was beside him before Laurel could speak. The old dog's head had turned toward the basket, his eyes, dulled now by pain medication and blood loss, fixed on the puppy. The puppy squirmed beneath the towel, mouth opening in a weak, silent protest. "He wants to see him," Laurel said. Warren looked at her sharply. She did not flinch. "Move the basket closer. Not against him, just close enough." Warren wanted to refuse. The refusal rose in him hard and unreasonable. Bishop was his. This pain was his. This ending, if it was ending, should not be shared with the small creature that had cost him so much. But Bishop was still looking, so Warren moved the basket. The puppy's head emerged from the fold of towel, one ear flattened, eyes half closed. Bishop gathered himself with an effort that made Warren's chest hurt. The old dog lifted his muzzle an inch, maybe two, and touched the edge of the towel. Not the puppy, just the towel around him. A scent taken in. A confirmation. Then Bishop turned his eyes toward Warren. There was no command in them. Bishop had never needed much command between them. But there was a question, and Warren understood it before he wanted to. "Can you carry what I cannot?" Warren bowed his head, not in surrender, not exactly. More like a man receiving weight. "Damn you," he whispered. Laurel looked away, not because she was uncomfortable, but because some moments belonged to those who had earned them. Bishop's tail moved once against the blanket. The night came slowly after that, not because the clock was slow, but because grief stretched time out and made every minute report for duty. Snow fell again, soft against the shed roof. Laurel stayed. She did not ask if she should. She simply moved her truck closer to block some wind, brought in another bag from the cab, and made bad coffee in Warren's kitchen without requesting permission. At some point, Warren realized he had not eaten. At another point, he realized he did not care. Bishop's breathing changed near midnight. Laurel heard it first. She crossed the shed without hurry, which frightened Warren more than if she had rushed. She knelt and placed 2 fingers against Bishop's neck, then listened with the stethoscope. Bishop's eyes opened. Warren moved to his head. "I'm here," he said. The words were smaller now, barely words at all. Bishop looked at him. For years that look had meant many things. Door left unsecured, man approaching from the left. Explosive scent near the wheel well. You are not sleeping. You are remembering. Get up. Keep moving. Live. Now it held all of that and none of it. Warren placed his bare hand between Bishop's ears. The fur there was still thick, still warm. He had touched that place after missions, after storms, after nights when neither of them wanted to enter a quiet room alone. "You did good," Warren said. The sentence was useless, too small for the life it addressed. But it was what he had. Bishop's gaze drifted once toward the basket. The puppy made a tiny sound, weak but alive. Bishop's muzzle moved, not enough to reach this time. Warren understood and slid the basket a little closer, careful as if moving a candle through wind. The old dog drew one more breath, then another. Then he let go without drama. No howl, no struggle, no cinematic last act. Only a body that had held the line longer than it should have, finally setting down its post. Warren did not move. Laurel removed the stethoscope from her ears and rested one hand lightly on Bishop's shoulder. Her head bowed for a moment, not as a doctor, as a witness. "I'm sorry," she said. Warren kept his hand in Bishop's fur. Outside, the snow kept falling. That seemed impossible to him. That the world could continue its small weather while Bishop did not continue anything. He did not cry. Not then. The feeling was too large to find the right door. Instead, he sat very still, as if movement would confirm what the silence already had. Laurel stayed near but did not crowd him. After a long while, she said, "We should keep the puppy warm." Warren closed his eyes. Of course. Even now. Especially now. He looked at the basket. The puppy breathed in uneven little pulls, still wrapped in towels, still alive because Bishop had decided he should be. Warren stood slowly. His knees felt older than the rest of him. Together, he and Laurel carried Bishop up the hill behind the cabin before dawn. Warren would not leave him in the shed until morning, like an object to be dealt with. The ground was hard beneath the snow, but near a stand of pines overlooking Priest Lake, the soil under the roots gave way enough for digging. Laurel helped without asking. She held the flashlight while Warren worked, then took the shovel when his hands stopped obeying him. They buried Bishop facing the frozen lake. Warren used a flat piece of pine board from the shed wall and carved the letters with his field knife. His hands were clumsy from cold and grief, but the words came out clear enough. Bishop. He held the line. Laurel stood beside him as the pale edge of morning found the lake. "He did," she said. Warren did not answer. Afterward, inside the cabin, the puppy was still alive. Laurel checked him again. His gums had a little more color. His breathing remained weak, but steadier. She left packets of electrolyte solution, a feeding syringe, and written instructions in block letters because she had already learned Warren would follow instructions better than comfort. "You should consider transferring him to Spokane when the roads are safer," she said. "A rescue center can monitor him around the clock." Warren looked at the puppy, then at the empty space beside the stove where Bishop's body should have been. "Fine." Laurel studied him. He had agreed too quickly. They both knew it. "I'm not saying today," she said. "I said fine." "Warren?" He looked at her then, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop. She zipped her medical bag. "I'll come back this evening if the road holds. Call sooner if he stops swallowing, if his gums go pale again, or if his breathing changes." He nodded once. At the door, Laurel paused. Snowlight framed her in gray-blue. "He didn't save that puppy by accident." Warren's voice came out rough. "Don't." She accepted the boundary. "All right." Then she left. The cabin became too quiet, not peaceful, vacant. Warren cleaned what had to be cleaned. He washed blood from his hands until the water ran clear, then kept washing for no reason. He folded the blankets Bishop had not died on and left the one he had. He could not decide whether to keep it or burn it, so he did neither. By evening, exhaustion hit him with the blunt force of weather. He sat in the chair by the stove and told himself he would close his eyes for 5 minutes. The puppy cried sometime after dark, a thin, broken sound. Warren jerked awake. "Bishop?" he called. The name struck the room and fell. There was no click of tags, no old dog lifting his head, no slow, uneven steps crossing the floor. Only the puppy in the basket, trembling beneath a towel, alive and helpless, and not to blame. Warren sat forward. The grief came then, not as a wave, but as recognition. Bishop was gone, whether the puppy stayed or left. The cabin would not hurt less because Warren sent away the small body Bishop had chosen to protect. He stood, crossed the room, and lowered himself beside the basket. The puppy's eyes were half open, unfocused. Its folded ear twitched when Warren touched the towel. "I know," Warren whispered. "You didn't ask for any of this." He adjusted the blanket, checked the gums the way Laurel had shown him, and rubbed small circles along the puppy's ribs until the breathing steadied. Outside, dawn had not yet begun. The lake was dark beneath the snow. On the hill behind the house, Bishop lay facing the water. Warren stayed on the floor beside the basket until the windows turned silver. He did not love the puppy, not yet. But he no longer had the strength to hate him for being alive. And for that first, long morning without Bishop, that was enough. For 3 days after Bishop's burial, Warren ran the cabin like a field station. That was easier than living in it. He wrote times on a yellow legal pad and taped the paper to the kitchen cabinet. Feeding, gum color, breathing, stool, weight, warm towel changes, amount swallowed, amount refused. He drew straight lines between each entry and kept the pencil sharpened with unnecessary care. The puppy had no opinion about the system. He slept, shivered, woke, cried, swallowed what he could, then fell back into the kind of exhausted silence that made Warren check his ribs too often. Laurel came twice, once at dusk and once after sunrise, her truck tires cutting clean tracks through the snow by the cabin. She adjusted feeding instructions, checked hydration, listened to the little chest, and told Warren the pup was still fragile, but improving. "He needs a name," she said on the 3rd visit. "He needs calories. He needs both." Warren stood by the counter with his arms folded. His olive combat shirt was clean, but he had not shaved as closely as usual. His jaw looked sharper from lack of sleep. Laurel glanced at the basket near the stove. The puppy's one folded ear showed above the towel. Calling him the pup works for medical notes, not for a life. Warren looked away first. Later that evening, when Laurel was gone and the cabin had settled into the thin sounds of winter, he wrote a single word at the top of the legal pad. Scout. He did not know why that one came. Maybe because Bishop had found the pup on what turned out to be his last patrol. Maybe because the little thing had survived by staying low and quiet under roots, waiting in enemy country without understanding the map. Maybe because Warren could not bear a name that sounded soft. Scout was temporary. That was what Warren told himself. Temporary name, temporary basket, temporary responsibility. As soon as Scout was stable enough to travel, Warren would take him to Spokane. A rescue center with heated kennels, trained volunteers, night staff, records, and people who could look at a puppy without seeing a grave on a hill. Until then, Warren would do the work. Work he understood. Affection was what he refused to authorize. Scout recovered by inches, and every inch irritated Warren in a way that shamed him. The puppy began to lift his head when Warren approached. Then he began to paw weakly at the towel. Then, on the 5th morning, he wobbled onto his feet inside the laundry basket, took 2 triumphant steps, and tipped over sideways into the folded blanket. Warren watched from the sink. A sound rose in his chest before he could stop it. Not quite a laugh. Scout sneezed, offended by gravity. Warren turned back to the dishes as if he had witnessed nothing. He kept the rules strict. Scout slept by the stove, not in Warren's room. He was fed on schedule, not when he cried. He was touched for medical reasons, warmed for medical reasons, cleaned for medical reasons. Warren did not hold him longer than necessary. He did not call him good boy. He did not let his hand linger behind the one ear that still refused to stand. Scout ignored the rules with the blind arrogance of the very young. Whenever Warren changed the towels, Scout crawled toward Bishop's old field jacket. Warren had tossed it over the arm of a chair the night after the burial and had not been able to move it since. It still carried smoke, snow, dried pine, and Bishop's faint scent beneath all of it. The first time Scout reached it, he buried his nose into the sleeve and fell asleep. Warren stood over him for nearly a minute. "No," he said. Scout slept on. Warren lifted him and put him back in the basket. 10 minutes later, Scout dragged himself halfway across the rug and found the jacket again. The second time, Warren's anger came fast and ugly. Not at the puppy, not really. At the small body still breathing. at the empty space beside the stove, at Bishop's collar hanging on the hook by the door with no living weight beneath it, at the fact that a creature could die saving another and the world would then ask the survivor to be grateful. Warren picked Scout up too sharply. The puppy gave a startled cry. Warren froze. Scout's small body trembled in his hands. Not from cold this time, from fear. The sound went through Warren like a nail. He set the puppy down gently in the basket, backed away, and gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. "I'm sorry," he said. Scout blinked up at him, one ear folded, the other trying badly to be brave. Warren left the room before the puppy could forgive him too easily. Gus Redding came by that afternoon with a canvas sack of split kindling, a jar of beef broth, and his steel coffee thermos dented on one side like it had survived a fight with farm equipment. He did not knock long enough to be considered polite. "Road's icing," Gus announced, stepping inside. "Thought I'd come make sure you hadn't decided to become a snowdrift." Warren stood at the table, weighing Scout on a kitchen scale lined with a towel. "Busy. Hell of a warm welcome. I didn't invite you. Never stopped me before." Gus put the sack by the door and looked toward the scale. Scout sat unsteadily on the towel, blinking at the older man with deep suspicion. His coat had begun to show its colors now. Tan legs, a dark smear over the back, gray-brown fuzz along the neck. He looked less like a dying animal and more like a badly assembled question. Gus leaned closer. "That him?" "That's him. He looks like a sock someone left in a ditch." Scout sneezed. "Got opinions, too," Gus said. "Good. World's short on quiet dogs." Warren lifted Scout back into the basket. "Laurel says he's improving." "I can see that." "You a vet now?" "No. But dying things don't usually glare." Gus poured himself coffee from his own thermos, because Warren's pot was empty, and Gus trusted no man who let that happen. He watched Warren adjust the towel around Scout with careful, almost clinical movements. "You handle him like evidence," Gus said. Warren's hand stopped. "Don't start." "I already started. You're just catching up." Warren turned slowly. "You came to bring kindling or commentary?" "Both fit in the truck." Scout, perhaps sensing a change in the air, began crawling toward the edge of the basket. Warren reached to stop him, but the puppy slipped under his hand, slid down onto the rug with more luck than skill, and staggered toward Bishop's old field jacket. Warren's face hardened. Gus saw it. Scout reached the sleeve, sank his tiny teeth into the cuff, pulled once with all the strength in his ridiculous body, and collapsed on top of it, exhausted by the conquest. The room went very still. "Move him," Warren said. Gus sipped his coffee. "Why?" "He can't sleep there." "Well, it looks like he can." "That was Bishop's." "I know whose it was." Warren's voice dropped. "Then don't make me explain it." Gus set the thermos down. His rough face lost its humor. Not all at once, but enough that the room noticed. "Warren," he said, "that pup isn't stealing from the dead." Warren's jaw worked once. "He smells something safe," Gus continued. "That's all. He isn't making a statement. He isn't replacing anybody. He's cold, he's scared, and that jacket smells like the dog who kept him alive." Warren looked toward the window. Snowlight filled the glass. Up on the hill beyond the pines, Bishop lay beneath the new mound. "You don't know what you're talking about," Warren said. Gus nodded once, slow. "Maybe not. But I know when a man is treating a living thing like a bill he resents paying." Warren stepped toward him. Gus did not move. The old mechanic had no military posture, no trained stance, no threat in him. Only stubbornness and enough affection to risk being hated for telling the truth. "Careful," Warren said. "No," Gus said. "I don't think I will be." Scout made a tiny noise in his sleep, paw twitching against Bishop's sleeve. Gus looked down at him, then back at Warren. "A dog like Bishop didn't die so you could turn loyalty into a prison." The sentence landed hard enough that Warren felt it behind his ribs. For a moment he wanted to throw Gus out. Instead, he picked up the coffee thermos and carried it to the sink. "You done?" Gus understood the answer inside the question. He put on his gloves. "For now." At the door, he paused. "Be mad at me if it helps. Just don't make that little fool pay rent in a house of ghosts." Then he left. Warren stood by the sink long after Gus's truck pulled away. The legal pad on the cabinet had Scout's name written at the top in Warren's square handwriting. Beneath it, every entry was precise, responsible, detached. A record of survival without any admission of wanting. On the rug, Scout slept on Bishop's jacket. Warren did not move him. That was the first surrender. Not love, not acceptance, just the end of one small cruelty. 2 days later, Warren called the rescue center in Spokane. The woman on the phone sounded competent and kind. That almost made it worse. She asked about Scout's age, condition, vaccination status, temperature stability, feeding schedule, whether he could swallow reliably, whether he had shown signs of respiratory distress. Warren answered each question. "Yes, ma'am." "No, ma'am." "Dr. Vance has seen him?" "German Shepherd mix, likely." "Found exposed near Priest Lake." He did not mention Bishop unless asked why the puppy had been found in time. There was a pause after he did. "I'm sorry," the woman said. Warren closed his eyes. "Do you have space?" "We can make space. Road conditions permitting, you could bring him tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow afternoon. There it was. A practical solution. A clean transfer. A way to return the cabin to its intended emptiness. Warren looked toward Scout, who was gnawing the corner of the towel with great concentration. The puppy had gained enough strength to be troublesome in very small ways. He had also started following Warren with his eyes whenever he crossed the room. "I'll bring him," Warren said. After the call, he packed as if preparing for a short operation. Towels, medical notes, electrolyte packets, small jar of food, Laurel's written instructions. He folded Bishop's jacket and placed it in a chair, not in the travel crate. That, he told himself, would be too much. The jacket belonged here. Bishop belonged here. Scout would go where living dogs went when practical people did what was best. The next morning was bright. Not cheerful. Warren would not grant it that. But bright. Sunlight stretched across the snowfields and turned each pine branch into a line of silver. The cold had softened slightly, enough for the road crews to clear the main route. Warren loaded Scout into a crate lined with fresh towels and set it on the passenger seat. The puppy, offended by confinement, made a small complaining sound, and then exhausted himself into silence. Warren stood by the open truck door. The passenger seat looked wrong. Bishop had sat there for years, upright, watchful, one ear tuned to Warren's breathing, one eye on the road. Now the crate sat where Bishop's blanket had always been. Warren almost moved it to the back. Then he shut the door. The drive began quietly. Scout slept for the first few miles. Warren kept the heater low and steady, as Laurel had advised. The medical folder lay on the seat beside the crate. His hands rested at 10 and 2 on the wheel, too formal for an empty road. He passed Redding's fuel and feed without stopping. Gus was outside by the pumps, filling the windshield reservoir of a station wagon. He saw the crate. He saw Warren. He did not wave. That was mercy. The road out toward the main highway curved past the ridge where the forest thickened. Warren drove slower there. He had not planned to. His foot eased off the gas as if the truck remembered what he had tried not to. The place was not marked. No sign, no cross, no visible trace from the road. Just a break in the trees and a shallow ditch where snow had been disturbed, smoothed and disturbed again by weather. Scout woke. The puppy lifted his head inside the crate, unsteady but alert. His nose pressed between the bars. He drew in the air and made a sound so small Warren felt it more than heard it. A whine. Not loud, not dramatic, but different from hunger. Different from complaint. Warren kept driving for another 20 yards. Then he stopped. The truck idled on the shoulder, heater ticking, exhaust rising behind them in a pale cloud. Sunlight lay clean across the snow. The forest stood innocent and still. Scout whined again. Warren stared through the windshield. "No," he said. The puppy's folded ear twitched. "You don't know anything." Scout pressed his nose harder to the crate door. Warren's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was not a foolish man. He did not believe the puppy understood sacrifice or graves or debt or the terrible arithmetic by which one life remained because another had ended. Scout knew scent, warmth, fear, hunger, the smell of trees, the faint trace, perhaps, of smoke, wool, blood, leather, and the old dog whose jacket he slept on. That was all. And somehow that was enough. Warren sat there until a pickup passed in the opposite direction, and the driver lifted 2 fingers from the wheel. Warren did not respond. His eyes were on the break in the trees. He remembered Bishop stepping forward. 3 steps, not young, not whole. Enough. Warren put the truck in gear. At the next turnoff, he did not take the highway south. He turned around. Scout made no triumphant sound. He simply lowered his head onto his paws and fell asleep, as if the decision had never belonged to Warren at all. Back at the cabin, Warren carried the crate inside and set it down by the stove. He did not unpack right away. He stood in the middle of the room, hearing the quiet settle differently this time. Not empty. Waiting. That afternoon, he opened the shed doors. Cold air moved through the old space, carrying dust, pine, and rust. Warren stood on the threshold and saw, for the first time, not his brother's unfinished storage, and not a place where Bishop had died, but a room that could be made useful. He worked until dark. He cleared broken crates, stacked old boards, swept mouse droppings, pulled nails from warped planks. He found a roll of insulation behind the workbench and 2 sheets of plywood that had survived the damp. He dragged the space heater to the safest corner and marked where a proper outlet would need repair. He laid a tarp over the worst floor gaps and set down clean blankets in a plastic tub. He was not building a rescue. He told himself that several times. He was making a warm room. That was all. A place for Scout to recover without taking over the cabin. A practical space. Temporary. Sensible. By evening, his back ached and his hands were raw where his gloves had split. He went inside, ate soup he did not taste, and returned with Bishop's old leather leash. For a long moment he stood before the shed wall. The leash hung from his fist, dark brown, worn smooth where his hand had held it for years. The metal clip was scratched. The leather still curved slightly from use, as if memory had a shape. Warren had avoided touching it since the burial. Now he drove a nail into a beam beside the workbench and hung the leash there. Not in the cabin by the door, not hidden in a drawer. Here, in the room that would exist because Bishop had held the line. Scout had followed him on unsteady legs from the cabin doorway, dragging one towel halfway across the snow-dusted threshold before Warren noticed. The puppy was too weak to be outside long, so Warren scooped him up and carried him in against his chest. "You're trouble," Warren said. Scout yawned. Warren set him on the folded field jacket beneath the hanging leash. The puppy turned in a clumsy circle, nosed the sleeve, and collapsed with a sigh too large for his body. Within seconds, he was asleep. Warren reached down as if to move him. His hand stopped. The shed was quiet except for the heater. Above Scout, Bishop's leash hung in the yellow work light, still and dark and real. Warren lowered his hand and rested it lightly on the puppy's back. Scout's ribs rose and fell. Alive. Not Bishop. Not a replacement. Not forgiveness. Just alive. Warren sat on an overturned crate beside him and stayed there until the snow outside turned blue with evening. By the third week, Scout had become strong enough to cause problems too small to punish. That was how Warren measured progress. The puppy could cross the warm room in 7 uneven steps, fall against a stack of folded towels, pretend he had meant to do that, then bite the corner of Warren's glove with the solemn commitment of a soldier taking an objective. He had gained weight. His coat had begun to show clearer color now, tan along the legs and face, a darker smudge across his back. One ear stood up for half a morning, then gave up before noon. The other remained folded, as if it had decided dignity was overrated. He was not Bishop. That fact, which had once cut Warren open every time he looked at him, had begun to change shape. Bishop had moved like a question already answered. Scout moved like a question nobody had proofread. Bishop had watched doors, windows, hands, roads. Scout watched dust motes in sunlight and attacked bootlaces for reasons known only to God and puppies. Bishop had carried silence like a uniform. Scout made tiny snorts in his sleep and woke up startled by his own pause. It should have irritated Warren more than it did. Instead, some mornings, he found himself standing in the doorway of the shed with coffee cooling in his hand, watching Scout wrestle with a towel and lose. He never laughed loudly, but he did not always turn away now. The warm room had improved too. Warren had patched the worst gaps in the floor, sealed the draft along the south wall, moved the space heater behind a wire guard, and built a low pen from spare boards. It was not pretty, but it was clean. The blankets were stacked by size. The feeding syringes rested in a labeled plastic bin. Laurel's written instructions were pinned to the wall beside Warren's own daily chart. He had not meant to make the place look official. That had happened because official was easier than honest. Laurel Vance came by every few days, sometimes after clinic hours, sometimes between calls. She never arrived empty-handed. A bag of puppy food, a packet of disinfectant wipes, a roll of vet wrap. Once, a rubber chew toy shaped like a tire, which Scout regarded with suspicion for 20 seconds before declaring war on it. On a clear afternoon, she found Warren crouched inside the pen while Scout attempted to drag one of his brown leather gloves under a crate. "That glove is bigger than he is," Laurel said from the doorway. Warren did not look up. "He's ambitious. He's ridiculous. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Scout growled at the glove, lost his balance, and sat down hard. He looked offended by the room itself. Laurel smiled before she could stop herself. Warren saw it. He also saw how quickly she tucked it away. Laurel was good at controlled kindness. She was not cold. She simply did not spill emotion unless she meant to. She wore dark cargo pants tucked into winter boots, a teal scrub top under a navy coat, and a stethoscope hanging loose around her neck. Her hair was tied low, as usual, though a few copper-brown strands had escaped near her cheek. The light coming through the shed window caught the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, lines made by weather, fatigue, and years of looking closely at creatures in pain. She knelt and let Scout come to her. He did, eventually, after first carrying the glove to safety. "Smart," she said. "Never trust a veterinarian on an empty mouth." Warren leaned against the workbench. He's eating better. I can see that. Laurel slipped 2 fingers gently along Scout's ribs. Still thin, but not frighteningly thin. Hydration is better. Coat's improving. Attitude is excessive. Scout bit the end of her shoelace. Case in point, she said. Warren reached down. Leave it. Scout looked at him with deep moral disappointment, then released the lace. Laurel noticed. He's learning your voice. Poor judgment on his part. He could do worse. Warren said nothing to that. While Laurel checked Scout's eyes and gums, her keys slipped from her coat pocket and landed on the blanket beside her knee. A small metal tag clinked against the floor. Not a house key, not a clinic fob. A worn dog tag, oval-shaped, scratched until the engraved letters were almost soft. Mercy. Scout sniffed it. Laurel picked it up quickly, but not quickly enough to seem casual. Warren looked away first this time. He understood objects a person did not explain. Laurel rubbed the tag once with her thumb, then clipped the keys back to her belt loop. For a while, only Scout's small breaths and the hum of the heater filled the shed. She was a search dog, Laurel said eventually. Warren did not ask who. Laurel seemed to prefer that. Mercy. Not military. Rescue. Fires, mudslides, missing hikers. She had a terrible habit of ignoring everyone except the person who needed her most. Warren looked at Scout, who had fallen asleep with one paw on the stolen glove. What happened? Laurel's face changed by very little, but the room felt the change. After a wildfire outside Orofino, rain came too hard over burned ground. Slope gave way while we were moving out. She got me to higher ground first. The rest did not need many words. Warren understood too much to fill the silence with sympathy. I'm sorry, he said. Laurel nodded once. I kept telling people I was fine because I still had work. Animals still needed care. Calls still came in. That was true. She looked at the tag on her keys. It just wasn't the whole truth. Warren rested his hand on the edge of the workbench. Bishop's leash hung from the beam above him. The leather had darkened where years of his grip had worn oil into it. You ever get another dog? He asked. No. The answer came too fast. Then Laurel gave a small breath, almost a laugh without humor. I treat dozens every week. I know their medications, their allergies, their bad hips, their bite histories, which ones need cheese before they'll take pills. But I don't let one sleep beside my bed. That a rule? More like a fence I pretend is a rule. Warren understood fences. He had built a life from them. The conversation should have ended there, in the safety of shared restraint. Instead, Scout woke, spotted Bishop's old field jacket folded near the pen, and toddled toward it with the serious determination of a drunk on a mission. Laurel watched him nose the sleeve and collapse against it. He still does that? She asked. Every chance he gets. Does it bother you? Warren's jaw tightened. Less than it did. That's something. It's not much. Something usually isn't, at first. The words stayed in the shed after she said them. Warren moved to refill the water bowl because he needed a task. 2 days later, a call came through Gus. A farmer outside town had found an old dog near his hay shed. Not injured badly, but limping, hungry, and too tired to avoid people. Gus relayed the message while Warren stood at the counter of Redding's Fuel and Feed, buying disinfectant and a new latch. Figured you'd want to know, Gus said. Warren frowned. Why? Gus gave him a look over the top of his coffee mug. Because you turned a shed into a dog infirmary and named your legal pad after a puppy. Don't play mysterious. I didn't name the legal pad. You wrote Scout on it in block letters large enough for aircraft." Warren looked toward the window, where snow drifted lightly past the pumps. "One dog," Gus said. "Old. Probably dumped. Man can't keep him. You could hold him a night. Maybe call one of those rescue outfits." "I'm not a rescue." "Didn't say you were." "You implied it." "I imply many things. Saves time." Warren said he would think about it. By evening, he had already cleared space in the warm room. Laurel arrived before the old dog did. Gus had called her too, apparently. She stepped into the shed, saw the second pen Warren had built from scrap boards, and stopped. "No." Warren straightened. "No?" "No. You don't know what I'm asking." "I know exactly what you're about to do. You're going to turn grief into infrastructure and call it responsibility." Warren's face closed. "There's a dog that needs somewhere warm tonight." "And this room barely meets the needs of the one already here." "It's clean. It's heated. It has one quarantine area that is not actually a quarantine area. No intake protocol, no vaccination history, no bite assessment, no disinfecting station outside the pen, no emergency plan if he crashes at 2 a.m., and no legal framework if that dog bites someone on your property." Warren stared at her. Laurel did not soften her voice. "Warren, kindness without a system can hurt animals too." The sentence struck sharper than he wanted to admit. "You think I can't handle an old dog for one night? I think you handled war zones and canine work and pressure most people can't imagine. That is not the same as running a rescue intake." "I'm not running a rescue." "Then stop acting like all a dog needs is your willpower and a heater." Scout woke at the edge in Laurel's tone and looked between them, one ear up, one down. Warren lowered his voice. "You don't know what this place is to me." Laurel's eyes flicked toward Bishop's leash. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I do. That's why I'm saying this before you turn Bishop into an excuse to take on more than you can do well." For a moment, the shed felt colder. Warren's pride rose first. It was an old reflex and a loyal one. Pride had helped him survive rooms where doubt was dangerous. It had gotten him through command evaluations, bad deployments, and nights when he had to keep working because men beside him still needed him steady. But pride had never fed a sick dog correctly. It had never prevented parvo. It had never written a liability policy. "What would you suggest?" he asked. Laurel seemed mildly surprised that he had asked. She recovered quickly. "I know someone." "Of course you do." "She coordinates licensed foster placements across Idaho and western Montana. She does not suffer fools, sentimental veterans, or people who think paperwork is optional." "That's supposed to sell me?" "It's supposed to warn you." The old dog from the hay shed went to a temporary foster that night, not to Warren's warm room. Warren pretended not to be bothered. Laurel pretended not to see that he was. Scout stole his glove again and improved nobody's mood. The following afternoon, Marlene Ortiz arrived in a Subaru that looked too small for the amount of equipment inside it. She was 61, compact, fast-moving, and dressed in a dark green puffer jacket with snow crusted along the hem. Her black and silver hair was clipped back with a metal barrette, and she carried a mustard-yellow clipboard like a weapon she had used before. Behind her glasses, her eyes were sharp enough to make a man stand straighter without knowing why. She took one look at Warren's shed and said, "This is not terrible." Warren looked at Laurel. Laurel's mouth twitched. "That's praise." Marlene walked the room without ceremony. She checked the heater guard, the floor seams, the distance between pens, the cleaning supplies, the extension cord, the water source, the window latch, and the trash bin. "Intent is good," she said. "Execution is incomplete." Warren folded his arms. "That seems to be the theme." Marlene looked at him over the clipboard. "If you want comfort, get a plaque. If you want to help dogs, get procedures. Laurel coughed into her hand. Marlene began writing. You can foster through our network after inspection and approval. Limited numbers. No strays directly off the road without intake through animal control or veterinary clearance. Quarantine area must be separate. Cleaning protocol posted. Bite risk assessment. Written emergency transport plan. Home checks for adopters. No exceptions because a dog looks sad. All dogs look sad in winter, Gus said from the doorway. No one had heard him arrive. Marlene turned. And you are? Gus. I provide bad coffee and unwanted perspective. Useful, if labeled correctly. Gus lifted his thermos. Coffee's labeled by smell. Marlene did not smile, but something in her eyes approved of him. Warren listened longer than he wanted to. Each requirement felt like a fence around the thing he had built out of pain. But as Marlene spoke, another truth became clear. The fences were not there to stop the work. They were there to keep it from collapsing under the first good intention that got out of control. Scout wandered out from behind the crate and approached Marlene's boot. Marlene glanced down. This the miracle puppy? He's not a miracle, Warren said. Scout grabbed her shoelace. Marlene marked something on the clipboard. Petty criminal, good appetite, strong will. Keep him. Warren opened his mouth. Closed it. Laurel saw. That was the first time the question of keeping Scout had been spoken by someone else as if it were already settled. Warren should have corrected her. He didn't. Near dusk, as Marlene loaded her clipboard and Gus's unwanted coffee into her car, another vehicle rolled up the driveway. A county sheriff's SUV. The man who stepped out moved with the unhurried pace of someone who disliked being made into a symbol of authority, but had accepted the uniform anyway. Deputy Tom Harlan was 52, broad but not heavy, with a square face, short dark hair graying at the sides, and a nose that had been broken at least once. His tan winter uniform coat was zipped to his throat, and a small black notebook rested in his chest pocket. He nodded to Laurel first, then Gus, then Warren. Maddox, deputy. Heard you might be taking in animals. News travels. In this county, news gets there before the weather. Tom walked the edge of the shed, not interfering, just observing. He asked about fencing, signage, number of animals, emergency contact, and whether Warren plans to have visitors on the property. His questions were not hostile. That almost made them harder. Hostility could be dismissed. Fairness had to be answered. I'm not trying to shut you down, Tom said finally. But if you bring frightened dogs onto your land, you're responsible for them, and for anyone who steps near them. Good intentions don't hold up in a bite report. Warren nodded once. Tom looked toward Bishop's leash on the wall. That his? Yes. Good dog? The best. Tom held Warren's eyes for a moment, then looked away respectfully. Then build something that would have met his standards. It was not sentimental. That was why it reached him. After everyone left, Laurel stayed behind to collect her medical bag. Scout had fallen asleep on Bishop's jacket again, the stolen glove tucked beneath his chin. The shed smelled of disinfectant, coffee, sawdust, and the faint, warm musk of puppy. Warren stood under the hanging leash, looking at the notes Marlene had taped beside the door. Feels like a lot, he said. It is. I thought helping would feel simpler. That's because stories stop at the rescue. Real care starts afterward and immediately becomes inconvenient. He almost smiled. Laurel clipped Mercy's tag back onto her keys. The old metal caught the yellow work light. Warren noticed. This time she let him. She doesn't replace Bishop, Laurel said. He followed her gaze to Scout. No. Maybe he's just continuing a part of the story Bishop didn't get to finish. Warren did not answer. The words entered him quietly, finding a place Gus's bluntness had cracked open and Marlene's rules had made steadier. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft against the shed roof. Inside, Scout slept beneath Bishop's leash, breathing evenly, one paw resting on the old field jacket. Warren looked at the clipboard notes, the heater guard, the patched floor, the small body asleep on the fabric that still carried the past. For the first time, the warm room did not feel like a reaction. It felt like the beginning of a promise he had not yet learned how to say aloud. By the time the third foster dog came through the warm room, people in town had begun to name the place before Warren did. Some called it Maddox's dog shed. Some called it that canine room. Gus, with no permission and less shame, called it Bishop's office. Warren corrected none of them. The work had remained small, exactly as Marlene Ortiz demanded. One old shepherd mix with a swollen paw stayed for 2 nights before transport. A black lab with frost-bitten ears passed through after Laurel cleared him medically. A nervous cattle dog slept in the corner pen for 26 hours, then left with a licensed foster from Sandpoint, who arrived with forms, references, and the calm of a woman who had seen worse. No strays came directly off the road. No dog entered without an intake call. No one walked into the warm room without Warren knowing their name, reason, and whether they had been told not to put fingers through the fencing. He followed the rules. That did not keep people from worrying. Winter towns carried sound differently. A dog barking in cold air seemed to travel farther than it should. A truck turning up Warren's road became a subject at breakfast. A bag of donated blankets left at Gus's fuel station became, by noon, proof that Warren was building a kennel, a shelter, a business, a problem, or a miracle, depending on who was telling the story. Warren disliked all 5 versions. He preferred facts. 3 dogs, short-term care, Marlene's network, Laurel's oversight, Deputy Tom Harlan's inspection notes, no visitors without approval. Facts, he had learned, did not always calm people. Sometimes they simply gave fear better furniture to sit on. The first official complaint came from a woman who owned 4 goats and had once lost 2 chickens to a loose dog she still described as if it had been a criminal mastermind. The second came from the manager of a vacation rental who said winter guests wanted peace, not barking. The third came indirectly through Calvin Price, which meant it arrived wearing a pressed coat and holding a folder. Calvin visited on a pale morning after a light snow, stepping from a black SUV that looked recently washed despite the weather. He was 55, tall and neat, with dark blonde hair combed carefully back from a face too controlled to be called unfriendly. His navy quilted jacket, clean boots, leather gloves, and burgundy document case made him look less like a man standing in a muddy driveway and more like someone about to evaluate it. Warren met him outside the warm room. Scout sat behind Warren's left boot, watching Calvin with open suspicion. The puppy was bigger now, though still awkward, one ear upright and the other tilted, as if listening to a private joke. He had recently discovered that snow could be eaten, attacked, rolled in, and regretted. Calvin looked at Scout. "That one yours?" Warren did not answer immediately. Scout leaned against his boot. "Yes," Warren said. The word surprised him less than it would have a month ago. Calvin noted it without comment. "I'm here on behalf of the council." "Figured. There have been concerns." "There always are." "Not all concerns are foolish, Mr. Maddox." Warren's jaw tightened. "Didn't say they were." Calvin glanced toward the shed. "Noise, sanitation, liability, property values, guests at the lake cabins, the impression of stray animals being gathered near a winter recreation area." "It isn't that." "Then you'll have no objection to explaining it publicly." Warren looked toward the pines beyond the cabin. Snow rested on the branches in clean, quiet lines. He thought of briefing rooms, maps, chain of command, men who knew how to listen because lives depended on it. A town meeting was different. People brought opinions to town meetings the way dogs brought mud to rugs. "When?" Warren asked. "Friday evening. Hall by the fire station." Calvin's tone was polite enough to be irritating. "You may want to bring Dr. Vance and Ms. Ortiz. Deputy Harlan, too, if he's involved." "He is." "Good. Then perhaps we can prevent this from becoming emotional." Scout sneezed on Calvin's boot. Warren looked down. Calvin looked down. Scout sat, innocent and damp-faced. For the first time, Warren saw Calvin struggle with an expression. "I'll clean that," Warren said. "No need." Calvin stepped back carefully. "Friday." He returned to his SUV. Scout watched him go, then attacked a clump of snow with unnecessary force. "Poor judgment," Warren told him. Scout seemed pleased with himself. On Friday, Warren nearly decided not to go. He had faced gunfire with a steadier stomach than the one he carried into that evening. The thought annoyed him. He could walk into a warehouse with Bishop at his side and trust the dog's nose before his own heartbeat. He could cross a pier at midnight with wind cutting spray into his face and know exactly what needed doing. But explaining himself to neighbors under fluorescent lights made his collar feel too tight. Laurel arrived before dusk. She found him in the warm room, rearranging the same stack of towels for the third time. Scout lay near the heater guard, chewing a rubber tire toy with deep concentration. "You're stalling," Laurel said. Warren placed the towel down with great care. "I'm organizing." "Those towels have achieved moral clarity." He looked at her. She wore a dark red winter parka over her clinic clothes, her hair tucked into a low knot. Mercy's old tag hung from her keyring at her belt, catching the yellow light when she moved. She had brought a folder, too, but hers was practical, labeled in black marker. Intake protocols, veterinary oversight, emergency plan. "You don't need to tell them everything," she said. "I know." "You don't need to make Bishop into a speech." "I know. You just need to tell the truth and show the plan." Warren folded his arms. "That all?" "No. You also need to not glare at Calvin like you're assessing breach points." "I don't glare." "You absolutely glare." Scout lifted his head as if confirming the diagnosis. Warren exhaled through his nose. "I don't like asking permission to do the right thing." "You're not asking permission to care. You're asking the town to trust that you'll care responsibly." He looked at the leash hanging on the wall. Laurel followed his gaze but did not push. "Bishop knew the difference between courage and impulse," she said. "You probably taught him some of that." Warren's mouth tightened. "He taught me more." "Then bring that." The town hall sat beside the volunteer fire station, a low building with salt stains at the entrance and a row of folding chairs inside. Someone had hung paper snowflakes in the windows weeks ago, and half had curled from the heat. The room smelled of wet wool, coffee, floor cleaner, and old bulletin board cork. Marlene Ortiz had already arrived and claimed a front table like a commander taking high ground. Her mustard-yellow clipboard rested beside 3 stacks of paper, each labeled. She wore a black sweater, gray coat, and an expression that suggested sentiment would be allowed only if submitted in writing. Deputy Tom Harlan stood near the side wall, in uniform, speaking quietly with the fire chief. Gus occupied the back row with his thermos and the posture of a man prepared to be disappointed in democracy. Calvin Price sat at the council table, document case open, papers aligned. Warren took a seat near Laurel and wished for Bishop with a sudden force that was almost physical. Not because Bishop could speak, because Bishop could sit at his left side and make silence feel occupied. The meeting began with procedural words Warren barely heard. A councilwoman read the agenda. Calvin summarized the concerns in a calm, clear voice. He did not exaggerate. That irritated Warren more than if he had. Exaggeration could be fought. Reasonable concern demanded respect. Noise, sanitation, dog limits, insurance, visitor safety, winter tourism, emergency response. Risk if an animal with unknown history became aggressive. A man in the third row said his brother's sheep had been harassed by loose dogs years ago. A woman near the aisle worried about children visiting rental cabins, though Warren's place was nowhere near the rentals. Another resident asked whether abandoned dogs would attract more predators or irresponsible owners. Warren felt his temper rise, not because all of them were wrong, but because each fear landed on the raw place where Bishop had died and Scout had lived. They were discussing risk in clean language. He had seen risk bleed into snow. Laurel's hand touched the edge of his folder. Not his hand, the folder. A small, careful reminder. Facts first. Marlene went before him. She explained licensing, foster agreements, transport procedures, intake limitations, and the fact that Warren's property would not function as an open admission shelter. She did not plead. She did not decorate. She sounded like paperwork had teeth, and she knew how to use them. Deputy Tom followed. He confirmed that he had inspected the fencing, noted required improvements, and would not support any expansion without safety compliance. He said this with such calm that both supporters and opponents seemed equally denied the drama they wanted. Then Calvin looked at Warren. "Mr. Maddox." Warren stood. The chair legs scraped the floor louder than they should have. For a second, he saw the room as a map. Doors, windows, exits, faces, coffee urn, fire extinguisher. Calvin's hands folded over a document. Laurel's folder closed. Gus leaning forward. Marlene's red pen still. He had spoken to commanders, investigators, grieving families, young handlers who needed to learn how to trust a dog before trusting themselves. But this was harder, because these people were not asking what had happened. They were asking what he intended to become. "My name is Warren Cole Maddox," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I served as a Navy Master-at-Arms canine handler. My dog Bishop served with me. After he retired, he came here with me." He stopped. The room waited. Warren looked down at his notes. They were too neat, too controlled. He did not want to read them, so he closed the folder. Laurel's eyes moved to him, but she said nothing. "Bishop died on my property line after stopping a coyote from taking a half-frozen puppy I found under pine roots," Warren said. "That puppy is alive. His name is Scout. He lives with me now." A small stir passed through the room. Warren kept going before sympathy could become the wrong thing. "I'm not telling you that for pity. I don't want pity. Bishop spent his life doing work. After he died, I had a warm shed, extra blankets, and a bad habit of following through. That is not enough to run a rescue. Dr. Vance made that clear. Ms. Ortiz made it clearer. Deputy Harlan put it in writing." Someone laughed softly. Warren breathed once. "What I am proposing is limited. Short-term foster recovery only through licensed intake. No open drop-offs, no unverified strays. No more than the approved number of dogs. Veterinary oversight, quarantine protocol, cleaning log, fencing inspection, emergency transport plan. If I fail those terms, this stops." Calvin watched him closely. A woman in the second row raised her hand. "And the barking?" "Managed by number limits, indoor overnight housing, and no long-term boarding." A man asked, "What if one bites?" Then we follow the written incident plan. Deputy Harlan has reviewed it. Dogs with unknown aggression history do not come to my property. Calvin leaned forward. And if tourists complain? Warren met his eyes. Then I will answer the complaint. But I won't build a place that exists only when nobody is inconvenienced by mercy. The room went quiet. Warren had not planned that sentence. He almost wished he had not said it. Then Gus stood up in the back. Every head turned because Gus Redding standing voluntarily at a meeting was apparently an event of civic significance. "I've known Warren since he came back," Gus said. "He is not charming. That should count in his favor because he isn't trying to sell you anything." A few people laughed. Gus pointed his thermos toward the front. "If that man wanted to run wild, he'd have done it quietly and better than most of you run legal. But he's got labeled bins in that shed, labeled for towels, for dogs. I saw him fold a blanket square enough to offend a hotel manager." More laughter, warmer now. Warren stared at the floor. Gus continued. "He'll follow rules if the rules make sense. If they don't, Marlene here looks like she'll hit him with a clipboard until they do." Marlene did not look displeased. Gus sat down before sincerity spread too far. The vote did not grant approval, exactly. It granted a trial. 3 months. Strict limit on dogs, inspection every 30 days, no public drop-offs, proof of insurance within 2 weeks, noise complaints documented. Any violation brought back before council. It was not a celebration. No one clapped. Calvin did not smile. Warren preferred it that way. Real permission often came with conditions. As people gathered coats and coffee cups, Calvin approached him. "I meant what I said," Calvin told him. "This town cannot afford a loose operation. It won't be one. I hope not. So do I." Calvin looked as if he expected more argument, and when none came, he closed his folder. "Good evening, Mr. Maddox." "Mr. Price." Laurel joined Warren near the door. "You did well." "I said mercy in a town meeting." "You survived." "Barely." Outside, snow had begun falling again, fine and bright under the parking lot lamps. Gus walked past them toward his truck. "You owe me coffee," Warren said. Gus grunted. "For that speech? You owe me dinner." The next afternoon, Warren repaired the back fence. The trial approval had not made him light. If anything, it had added weight. But the weight had shape now. He could work with shape. He drove new posts into frozen ground, tightened wire, checked the gate latch twice, and measured the space between the bottom rail and the snowpack. Scout assisted by stealing a glove, dropping it 6 feet away, and looking deeply satisfied. "Security breach," Warren said. Scout barked once. His first real bark. It startled them both. Warren stared at him, Scout stared back, then sneezed. The sound should have made Warren smile. Instead, for no reason he could name, his chest tightened. The bark had been thin, high, alive. It had filled the yard in a way Bishop's silence never would again. Warren turned back to the fence. A gust came down from the hill carrying loose snow from the pines. It slid through the yard, lifted a towel from the porch rail, and sent it tumbling toward the slope behind the cabin. Scout saw it move. Before Warren could call him, the puppy lunged after it, not fast like danger, fast like youth. He slipped under the half-repaired lower rail, stumbled once, then vanished around the side of the shed after the towel. "Scout!" No answer. Warren set down the hammer. "Scout!" The yard held still, too still. He moved toward the shed, expecting to find the puppy tangled in the towel, proud of himself. The towel lay caught on a branch near the woodpile. Scout was not there. Warren's breath left him. He checked behind the shed, under the porch, near the truck, along the fence line. He called again, sharper this time. Snow fell softly, hiding small prints as they formed. The puppy's tracks led toward the pines behind the house, then blurred where wind had swept powder across them. For a moment, Warren was not in Idaho. He was everywhere he had ever lost sight of something he was supposed to protect. His hand went cold around the fence post. Then he ran. Laurel arrived 10 minutes later because Warren called and said only 2 words: "Scout's gone." Gus came 5 minutes after that in his truck, tires sliding into the drive, face grim enough that he made no joke. Laurel brought a flashlight and treats. Gus brought a coil of rope, and the kind of silence men use when they are afraid but refuse to decorate it. "He can't have gone far," Laurel said. Warren did not answer. They spread out behind the cabin. The snow was light but steady. Not a storm, not enough to erase the world, enough to make every shadow seem guilty. Warren called until his voice roughened. "Scout?" The name broke against the trees. No bark came back. Laurel moved carefully near the old trail, scanning for prints beneath low branches. Gus checked the ditch along the service road. Warren went uphill because some part of him already knew where scent and wind would lead a frightened puppy. The mound beneath the pines was half covered in fresh snow. Bishop's marker stood dark against the white. Bishop, he held the line. At the base of it, curled into the hollow where the wind had dropped the old towel, lay Scout. The puppy was not hurt. He was shivering, more from fear and cold than injury, nose tucked into the fabric. The towel had been one of the old ones from Bishop's bedding, washed but not stripped of everything. Scent remained where human grief could not see it. Warren stopped so suddenly Laurel nearly ran into him. Scout lifted his head. His one uneven ear tipped sideways. Warren dropped to his knees in the snow. He had meant to be angry. He had meant to check for injury, scold him, carry him down, finish the fence, restore order. Instead, the sound that came out of him was broken. Scout crawled toward him, small paws sinking in powder. Warren gathered him against his chest with both hands, too tight at first, then loosening when Laurel touched his shoulder. "He's okay," she said. Warren nodded, but the nod fell apart. He bent over the puppy and cried. Not the silent, disciplined grief of Bishop's last night, not the stunned stillness beside the grave. This was ugly and human and impossible to command. His shoulders shook. Snow gathered on the back of his jacket. Scout squirmed once, then tucked his cold nose under Warren's chin. Gus stood a few steps away, looking toward the lake as if the view required serious inspection. Laurel stayed close, not touching him more than that one hand on his shoulder. She did not tell him it was all right. She did not say Bishop would understand. She did not turn grief into language. She simply remained. That was enough. After a while, Warren pulled Scout back and checked him properly. Paws, ribs, mouth, breathing. No blood, no limp. Only cold, fear, and the reckless stupidity of a living thing still learning the world had edges. "You little idiot," Warren whispered. Scout licked his thumb. Warren closed his eyes. Gus cleared his throat. "For the record, he takes after you." Warren gave a wet, exhausted sound that might have been a laugh if judged kindly. He stood with Scout bundled inside his jacket. The puppy settled against his chest, warm and damp and alive. They walked down the hill together. Warren stopped once beside Bishop's marker. Snow had gathered along the carved letters, softening them without hiding them. He looked at the grave, then at the warm weight beneath his coat. No speech came. No promise large enough to embarrass the dead. Only a few words, low enough that perhaps only Laurel heard. "I'm trying, old friend." Then he carried Scout home through the falling snow. 3 months did not turn grief into peace. Warren had learned better than that. 3 months changed the shape of the days, that was all. The pain did not leave the cabin near Priest Lake, but it stopped standing in every doorway. It moved into objects, routines, and places that could be touched without breaking him open each time. Bishop's leash still hung on the beam inside the warm room. His collar rested on a small shelf Warren had built from pine. The grave on the hill still faced the frozen lake, but the shed behind the cabin no longer felt like the place where Bishop had died. It had become a place where other animals got warm enough to keep living. The trial period had not been easy. Nothing that mattered had been easy. Warren spent the first week after the town meeting learning that rules multiplied after a person agreed to follow them. Marlene Ortiz sent checklists in emails so blunt they seemed written by a judge. Laurel Vance added medical notes, in handwriting neater than Warren expected from someone who worked with frightened dogs. Deputy Tom Harlan came by every 30 days, walked the fence line, checked the gate latch, and wrote in his little black notebook without theatrical approval or disapproval. Gus Redding provided coffee, criticism, and occasionally both in the same thermos. "That heater guard is crooked," he said one morning, standing in the doorway while snow fell behind him. "It is level." "It's emotionally crooked." Warren did not look up from the intake log. "That isn't a category." "Should be." Scout barked once from the corner, then tripped over his own front paws while turning to inspect the sound he had made. Gus pointed at him. "There, your assistant agrees." Scout had grown into his legs badly, and with enthusiasm. He was still smaller than a full German shepherd should have been at his age, but no longer fragile. His coat had warmed into tan along the chest and legs, with a dark saddle down his back and a gray-brown softness around the neck that made him look unfinished in the best possible way. One ear stood up now. The other leaned outward at a slight angle, giving him the expression of a dog willing to listen, but not necessarily obey. He still stole gloves, not as often, enough to maintain his principles. The first time Warren realized Scout had a gift, it was not dramatic. A shepherd mix from a licensed foster transfer had arrived after surgery for an infected paw. The dog was older, thin, suspicious of men, and determined to make every examination a negotiation. Warren gave her distance. Laurel checked her carefully. Marlene had already warned them the dog would not tolerate crowding. Scout wandered to the outside of the pen, carrying one of Warren's gloves like a criminal with evidence in his mouth. Warren started to call him back, but Laurel lifted a hand. "Wait." Scout did not bark. He did not wag wildly. He did not press his nose through the bars. He lay down several feet from the pen, facing slightly away, the glove between his paws. The old shepherd mix watched him for nearly a minute. Her growl faded. Her head lowered. By the time Laurel returned with medication, the dog had stopped trembling. "Huh," Gus said from the doorway. Warren frowned. "Huh, what?" "That pup might be useful." Try not to sound surprised. "I'm always surprised when you raise something sociable." Warren looked at Scout. The puppy had fallen asleep near the pen, not touching, not demanding, simply present. Bishop had protected by standing between danger and what mattered. Scout protected by making danger feel less near. That distinction settled into Warren slowly. Not a replacement. A different kind of duty. The warm room changed by inches, too. Warren repaired the floor properly, not just enough to satisfy inspection. He installed a locked medicine cabinet because Laurel said out of reach was not the same as safe. He built a real quarantine partition with Marlene's exact measurements. He posted cleaning schedules, feeding logs, emergency phone numbers, and a maximum capacity notice in black letters large enough for Gus to mock. The sign outside remained blank. For weeks, it was only a sanded board leaning against the shed wall. Gus noticed because Gus noticed what men avoided. "You going to name the place?" "No." That's efficient. It's not a place. Gus looked around at the heater, the kennels, the shelves, the labeled bins, the medical chart, Scout's stolen glove under the chair, and the foster dog snoring in the recovery pen. No, he said. Clearly a weather event. Warren ignored him. The next dog who came through was the one who changed the sign. His name was Major, an 11-year-old retired security dog with arthritis in both hips and the offended dignity of an old officer forced to accept help from civilians. Major's handler had died the previous fall, and the man's sister, a retired firefighter named Ellen Braddock, brought him to the network with red eyes and a voice that kept trying not to shake. She was in her early 60s, tall, strong-backed, with cropped silver hair and hands rough from years of work. She did not want to surrender him. She simply could not carry him up apartment stairs anymore. Major stayed in the warm room for 12 days, while Marlene arranged a permanent placement with a retired couple outside Coeur d'Alene who had a single-story house, heated floors, and more patience than pride. On Major's last morning, he stood beside Warren under the blank sign, leaning against his leg with all the weight of age. Scout sat nearby, unusually still. Ellen had come to say goodbye before the transport. She looked at the blank board, and then at Bishop's leash visible through the open doorway. "This was his room, wasn't it?" she asked. Warren did not answer fast enough. Gus did it for him. Everything around here was Bishop's before Warren admitted it. Warren shot him a look. Ellen touched Major's graying head. "Then let it carry his name. Some names keep working after the body is gone." That sentence did not sound like advice. It sounded like experience. Warren said nothing. But 2 nights later, after the cabin had gone quiet and Scout had fallen asleep with his chin on the threshold of the shed, Warren took the blank board inside. He set it on the workbench beneath Bishop's leash. He measured the letters twice, marked them lightly with pencil, then carved slowly. Bishop's warm room. His hands were steadier than he expected. Under the name, he added a smaller line, "For the ones still holding on." When he hung the sign the next morning, Gus stood with his thermos and said nothing for once. That was how Warren knew it was right. At the end of the 3 months, Calvin Price came for the review. He arrived on a clear winter afternoon, the kind where the snow was bright enough to hurt the eyes, and the lake looked like hammered glass. Calvin wore a dark overcoat, clean boots, and the same burgundy document case he had carried to the first meeting. Warren had expected him to look pleased if something was wrong. He did not. He looked thorough. That was fair. Calvin inspected the fence with Deputy Tom, reviewed Marlene's intake records, checked Laurel's medical oversight forms, asked about noise logs, cleaning schedules, insurance paperwork, maximum occupancy, visitor policy, waste disposal, and emergency transport. Warren answered without defensiveness. That surprised Calvin more than any argument would have. Scout followed at a distance, carrying a glove and occasionally dropping it in front of Calvin as if offering a treaty. Calvin stepped around it each time until finally he stopped, picked it up with 2 fingers, and handed it to Warren. "Your employee is creating trip hazards. He's unpaid." "That explains the conduct." Gus laughed so hard he had to turn away. Calvin did not smile, but the corner of his mouth considered it. Inside the warm room, Laurel finished changing a bandage on a nervous hound while Marlene checked adopter references on her phone. Deputy Tom stood near the entrance and looked at the room the way he looked at roads after an accident. Not for blame, but for what could prevent the next one. Calvin closed his folder. "This is cleaner than I expected." "Thank you," Warren said. "That was not a compliment. It was an observation." "I'll take it." Calvin looked at him then. "You understand the approval remains limited?" "Yes." "No open intake. No exceeding capacity. No public drop-offs. No event without notice. Yes. If you keep it clean, safe, and legal, I won't oppose continuation. Warren nodded. Calvin glanced at Scout, who had fallen asleep against the wall as if the review had been exhausting for everyone. And keep that dog away from my laces. No promises. This time Calvin did smile, barely. It vanished quickly, but not before Laurel saw it. She looked down to hide her own. The first winter adoption afternoon was not public in the way people imagined public things. Marlene refused anything that sounded like a festival. "No balloons," she said. Gus looked disappointed. "I bought one shaped like a bone." "No balloons." "It had personality." "It had liability." So the afternoon remained small. Adults only. Pre-screened applicants. 2 foster placements, 1 adoption finalization, 1 meet and greet. Coffee in the corner. Paperwork on a folding table. Hand sanitizer by the door. A sign reminding visitors not to reach into pens. Tom's patrol vehicle knew the gate, not because trouble was expected, but because safety was easier before it became urgent. Ellen Braddock returned, not for Major this time, but to meet an old black and tan dog with cloudy eyes and a stubborn heart. She knelt slowly outside his pen and waited for him to approach. When he finally did, he pressed his nose against her palm and sighed like he had been tired for years. "I know," she whispered. "Me too." Across the room, a widower named Martin Hale, a former mail carrier with careful hands and a quiet voice, signed foster papers for a shy spaniel mix who would not make eye contact, but had taken 3 treats from his pocket. Martin had no grand speech. He only said his house was too quiet after his wife died, and maybe quiet did not need to be empty. Warren heard the sentence while filling the water bowl. It stayed with him. Laurel moved through the room with calm efficiency, answering medical questions, correcting handling before it became a problem, and occasionally brushing snow from Scout's back when he came inside after patrolling the doorway. Her keys jingled at her belt, Mercy's old tag clicking softly against the ring. Warren noticed the sound now without flinching. His own old object hung on the wall. Bishop's leash, Mercy's tag. Neither was a chain anymore. They were proof that love could leave evidence without becoming a sentence. At one point, Laurel found Warren outside beside the sign, watching a couple walk slowly toward their car with paperwork in hand and hope they seemed afraid to trust. "You all right?" she asked. He looked at the warm room. Yellow light spilled out onto the snow. Gus was arguing with Marlene about coffee strength. Tom was pretending not to enjoy it. Scout stood in the doorway like a guard with poor posture. "No," Warren said. Laurel turns toward him. Then he added, "But not in the way I used to be." She understood. They stood shoulder to shoulder without touching. Warren did not reach for her hand. Laurel did not step closer. Their relationship had not become simple enough for gestures other people could easily name. She still lived above her clinic. He still slept alone in the cabin. She came to the warm room on weekends and when medical calls required it. He helped at her clinic when she needed heavy bags lifted, gates repaired, or a dog held still by someone who understood fear. Sometimes they drank coffee on the porch after everyone left. Sometimes they spoke about Bishop and Mercy. Sometimes they said nothing and let the dogs make the room less lonely. That was enough for now. Near sunset, the last applicant drove away and the yard quieted. The snow had begun falling again, light and slow, flakes catching in Scout's whiskers as he bounded after Warren up the hill behind the cabin. Laurel followed at a respectful distance. She had not been asked. She came anyway, which Warren had come to understand as one of the kinder forms of loyalty. The path to Bishop's grave was packed now from repeated visits. The marker stood beneath the pines, weathered but firm. Bishop. He held the line. Warren had carried a smaller board under his arm. He brushed snow from the base of the marker and knelt. Scout sniffed the board, then the snow, then sneezed into Warren's glove. Warren gave him a look. "Show some discipline." Scout wagged his tail. Laurel stood a few steps back, hands in her coat pockets. The late light touched her hair, turning the loose strands copper gold. Mercy's tag clicked once as she shifted her weight. Warren fixed the small board beside Bishop's marker. He had carved it the night before. He saved one life. That life opened this door. The words were plain. No poetry hiding the wound. No grand claim that Bishop's death had been worth it. Warren would never say that. Nothing made the loss fair. But something had grown from it. That was different. Scout leaned against Warren's knee, warm and solid. Warren placed a hand on the puppy's head. Not the old place between Bishop's ears. Scout had his own spot, just behind the tilted ear, where the fur grew softer than the rest. "I didn't know how," Warren said quietly. The trees held still. He did not know whether he meant how to keep Scout, how to build the room, how to keep loving after loss, or how to stand at a grave without becoming buried beside it. Maybe all of it. Laurel stepped closer, still not crowding him. "You learned enough for today," she said. He looked back at her. For a moment, the future stood there without demanding to be solved. A veterinarian with an old dog tag. A man with a leash on a wall. A puppy too young to know he had changed the map of a life. A room below the hill where frightened animals slept warm because one old canine had refused to step aside. Warren rose. The three of them walked back down as evening settled over the lake. Inside Bishop's warm room, the lights glowed gold against the snow. Clean blankets lay folded on the shelf. The medicine cabinet was locked. The intake board was ready for the next name. Gus had left the coffee pot half full and terrible. Marlene's clipboard sat on the table with 3 notes in red ink. Deputy Tom had forgotten his pen by the door. The place was imperfect, limited, breakable, real. Scout stopped at the threshold and looked up at Warren as if awaiting orders. Warren opened the door. "Go on." The puppy bounded inside, slipped on the mat, recovered with great dignity, and took his place near the first pen, where the shy spaniel mix watched him through the bars. Scout lay down several feet away, not too close, not too far. The spaniel's trembling slowed. Warren stood under the sign outside, snow landing softly on his shoulders. He understood then that loyalty did not end when a friend was buried. It changed assignments. It moved from one life into the next, not as replacement, not as repayment, but as a quiet order to keep protecting what could still be saved. Behind him, Laurel locked the medicine cabinet. Gus's laugh carried faintly from the cabin. Scout sighed from inside the warm room, and beyond the trees, Bishop rested above the frozen lake. His name facing the lighted door his last patrol had opened. Some losses do not leave us the way they found us. Bishop's final act did not erase Warren's grief, and Scout did not replace the friend he lost. But sometimes, grace does not come by giving back what was taken. Sometimes, it comes by placing a small, fragile life in front of us and asking us to keep loving anyway. If you are carrying a loss of your own, may this story remind you that healing does not mean forgetting. It means letting love become useful again. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more stories of loyalty, hope, and quiet courage. May peace find you gently, wherever you are tonight.